Good morning and welcome to this conversation. I'm Gail Thomas-Strong, Vice President of Community Engagement for WFYI Public Media, and so pleased that you're with us. Older adults are the fastest growing demographic in Central Indiana, and it's important that we shine a light on the population trends, notable changes, and basic needs of this growing group. The Central Indiana Senior Fund, which is a fund of the Central Indiana Community Foundation, has partnered with the Polis Center at IUPUI to develop and maintain a go-to resource of place-based information to help community leaders, decision makers, older adult serving organizations, and philanthropic organizations identify and develop needed programs, funding, and policies. The annual State of Aging in Central Indiana report and its research briefs, online information portal, and community forums all provide a wealth of up-to-date and relevant information for us to use. But here's something you can do. We invite you to take the State of Aging user survey so that we can continue to learn about the interests and needs of existing and potential State of Aging users. WFYI is pleased to be a partner in today's presentation on transportation equity. We believe that a shared understanding of the facts and community voices can shed light on this issue of critical importance to older adults and their caregivers. So here's what to expect today. Polis will share findings about public transit accessibility for the older population. This will be followed by a panel discussion with local transportation experts and stakeholders, including an opportunity for you to ask questions of the panelists. I'm so pleased to introduce Jill Sheridan, WFYI's government and policy reporter, to guide this conversation. Jill, thank you.
Thank you, Gail. And good morning, everyone. My name, as Gail mentioned, is Jill Sheridan. I'm a reporter with WFYI. I have covered senior issues quite a bit extensively as a health reporter, and transportation is something I'm very passionate about now as a city reporter in Indianapolis. So this is going to be a fantastic discussion today. I'm really happy to be here and happy to introduce our researcher. This is Matt Dietrich, who will be presenting this morning, presenting the annual State of Aging in Central Indiana report with a focus again on transit for seniors. Matt Dietrich, researcher with the Polis Center at IUPUI. Take it away.
Thank you, Jill, for that great introduction. I'm so pleased to be here, and special thanks to our panelists who are here again, who are going to help facilitate some great discussion following up my presentation on our findings. Lakeisha Jackson, Karen Brooks, Mike Roth, and Jen Higginbotham. We really appreciate their time, and hopefully you all will experience some great interactive discussion after some of their question answering and whatnot following this presentation. So without further ado, I'll just get into the results from the Polis Center and what we found in looking more in depth at public transit accessibility for an aging adult population in Central Indiana. So first, I just kind of want to get us started on the need. A lot of us are here because we recognize that there is an important need for better transit access and accessibility for older adults, particularly as more and more older adults are entering our population in Central Indiana just through natural aging processes and better life expectancy and whatnot. But the important thing is that recent data and survey throughout Central Indiana has shown that while there's a growing number of older adults in Central Indiana, there's increasing dissatisfaction with the ease of transit access, unfortunately. So when looking at the Central Indiana Community Assessment Survey, from comparing 2017 results to 2021 results, there's actually a decline in by 7 percentage points in satisfaction with the ease of public transit access. And when looking at this survey, it's actually looking at adults age 60 plus, and we found that in 2017 that 25% of older adults in Central Indiana believed that they had ease of access with public transit, but this dropped to 18% in 2021. Whereas access through car, automobile driving, and walking remained about the same. So this goes to show that there is unfortunately some gaps in public transit accessibility for our aging adult population in Central Indiana. And this is really important to address because transit is an important component of the livelihoods of a lot of people, as it's their only means of accessible and free transportation from one point to another. For example, public transit can enhance obviously the autonomy of travel to important destinations of interest. Some of particular interest to older adults, obviously, are health trips such as the health clinics, the doctor's office, family visitations, shopping to get essential items like groceries, or even non-essential items like things that are more of entertainment purposes. There's also the important social aspects of travel to meet and stay connected with friends in the community. And research has shown, and we point this out in our research brief, which will be again sent out following this presentation, you can see some of the peer-reviewed literature that clearly shows that when older adults they lack this connectivity through transportation to get from different points of interest, they start to develop greater instances of isolation and depression. So with greater public transit access, it actually decreases these instances of isolation and feelings of depression. So it has an overall health kind of benefit when you have this better transit accessibility. And in general, it doesn't just help kind of alleviate the isolation and loneliness of older adults and help with their health outcomes, but it helps the overall community as a whole by interconnecting different generations of people and better spreading and communicating different ideas among these groups of people. So overall, transit is just an important thing for just the whole community, not just the older adult population. And when we look at pre-existing data, and this was previously examined in one of our previous State of the Aging reports for Central Indiana, it's very clearly shown. And if you look here, hopefully you can see my laser pointer, that when you look at population age 65 plus in Marion County specifically as an example, that around the urban center, so downtown Indianapolis, you actually have less of a population of older adults. And once you start going more to the outskirts of Marion County, such as the suburban areas, you see a drastic rise in population of the older adults age 65 plus. And this pretty much extends throughout other outerlying counties in Central Indiana as well. There are some that have greater pockets of older adults than others, but in general, we see more older adults in more suburban and rural areas in Central Indiana, as opposed to the downtown portions like around Monument Circle in Indianapolis. Unfortunately, though, when looking at transit density, so say fixed public transit, so when you think like Indigo in this example, the bus lines that go back and forth throughout the city, when we quantify the density of that based on how frequently these lines go back and forth over a certain area with weekly revenue miles over square miles, we see that this middle census tracts in Indianapolis have the greatest density of public transit, but this is also where there are the least amount of older adults that live there. So hopefully this just illustrates that where there is the greatest amount of fixed transit currently, that is where there is the least amount of older adult population in Marion County, and these trends are similar to outerlying counties as well. So now I just want to get into the more in-depth look that we did on updated data with looking at transit accessibility for older adults in Central Indiana, kind of knowing these things ahead of time with some of the limits of accessibility, particularly in Marion County and also the outerlying counties. So one of the things we wanted to do was conduct this thing called a network analysis, which is essentially just a way of looking at, all right, what is the actual ability to access a point of interest within a certain amount of time if you left your home at a certain time during the day and wanted to get to, say, the grocery store, and in this case, a health clinic within 30 minutes. So in this example, we essentially have all these census tracts in Marion County, and we basically put a point in the middle of each census tract as a theoretical starting point for any individual looking to use fixed public transit. And we basically modeled this as if you want to leave your home at, say, 8 a.m. on a typical Monday to get to a health clinic, say you have a doctor's appointment at 8:30, that you just need a health clinic checkup and you want to get there, but you don't have a car. Well, we modeled how many health clinics you can get to within Marion County if you left your home, which in this case, again, is the middle of a census tract. So there is a point, for example, where I have my red marker right now, that was an example point. So if you left there, how many health clinics can you get to in 30 minutes? And what we saw was that when you look at central Marion County and the downtown center, this is where there's the greatest amount of health clinics that you can access within 30 minutes through walking and fixed transit. When you go look at the outskirts of Marion County, where there are both less fixed transit lines and less health clinics, there are not as many you can reach within 30 minutes. In fact, a lot of these outer lying census tracts in Marion County, you cannot reach a health clinic within 30 minutes from leaving your home, including both walking, waiting, and bus time. So this just wanted to model an example of how there's greater accessibility to health clinics in the downtown center. But again, from that previous map I showed, we also know this is where there is the least amount of older adults that live there. We wanted to also look at another important destination of interest, places of worship, as an important social component of destinations that older adults like to frequent. And what we found was that there are a lot of places of worship to potentially access throughout Marion County. And you can kind of see this in this map, as it's a lot denser with how many places you can reach within 30 minutes of leaving your theoretical home in the middle of a census tract. The thing to note, though, is that while there are a lot more places of worship and the density is a lot greater for places you can reach in 30 minutes throughout most of Marion County, people are much more selective on the places of worship that they would like to attend, as opposed to not as great as much of a selectivity with, say, health clinics or grocery stores. So this can be kind of deceiving in that a lot of people might have to travel more than 30 minutes to actually reach where they want for a place of worship. They might have to, for example, cross counties or go all the way from the end of one county to the end of another. So this does show that there are a large amount of places of worship to access within 30 minutes relative to health clinics. And lastly, we wanted to look at this grocery store access, because grocery store access, obviously, obtaining groceries you can now do through some delivery services to homes and whatnot, and don't have to physically actually go to the grocery store, but these are often could be more expensive and difficult in kind of navigating around. So a lot of older adults in particular still physically need to go to the grocery store to access essential goods and sometimes even services, such as, say, getting an updated flu shot there if that's closer than a health clinic. And what we saw with grocery store access is that within 30 minutes, there's a lot of grocery stores accessible right along fixed transit lines, but not as much in these areas kind of in between the fixed transit lines. And I'll actually show you here. This is an overlying map of Indigo 22 routes, and it essentially overlays pretty well where you can access more than one grocery store within 30 minutes. And this can be a combination of factors, such as grocery stores popping up just more around these fixed transit lines, as well as just the fact that there aren't as many grocery stores in between for potentially other reasons, developmental reasons. But this is just interesting to point out that, again, there are several grocery stores within 30-minute access within Marion County through just walking and transit, but they're really focused along those fixed, currently existing transit lines. So now that we've kind of talked about areas of potential access within, say, 30 minutes of walking and transit, we wanted to look at more of this component of actually getting to that initial bus stop, really the distance from one's home to the bus stop, from the origin to the bus stop, as we call it in our analysis. So they're using a little bit outdated data, but still very relevant, from 2016. This is Indigo ridership data from people that actually rode the Indigo bus routes in 2016. There is a large survey of how they got on these buses, demographics, and a lot of other components. And from that data, we were able to basically calculate the average distance that an individual is willing to travel from their point of origin to the initial bus stop that they get on. And we calculated this by this thing called geodesic distance, which is just a fancy way of saying from point A to point B as the crow flies, but taking into account curvature of the earth, which in Indiana, there's not much, it's very flat. So it's pretty much negligible. And this is important because these are pretty, as you'll see in these analyses, just in the magnitude of hundreds of feet, which a lot of people will cut across parking lots and take those tangents as opposed to actually following the road networks to get to bus stops. And we kind of consistently just applied that among our whole analyses for simplicity. But the important thing to take away from this figure here is that the adults 65 and over significantly travel less from their origin to a bus stop relative to all other age groups. The only one that is relatively close is basically children, people under 16. And when we did more sophisticated statistical techniques to look for, is there actual statistical significance between these groups, it is quite clear that 65 and over adults statistically, on average, definitely travel less from their origin to their first bus stop compared to any other age group except those under 16. What's interesting, though, is that when we look at the distance from your final bus stop to your ultimate destination, we don't see these trends. Essentially, when statistically speaking, the differences between these age groups is null. That while you look at this bar graph and see that, okay, adults 65 and over on average do travel slightly less from their final bus stop to their ultimate destination, we can't really say with certainty that it's actually different than any of the other average distances that these age groups will travel from their final bus stop to their ultimate destination. So this just goes to show that what seems to be more of an important factor for perhaps is that initial bus stop from the origin in regards to how far people are willing to travel, particularly older adults. And taking this into consideration, we viewed this as a potential mobility limitation thing where we had data now supporting that older adults are less likely to travel as far from their origin to the initial bus stop. So we wanted to make an estimate of how many older adults likely live further than this threshold from a fixed route in Marion County. And so what we did was we basically used that data, the distribution of data, seeing, all right, here is all the different distances that older adults were willing to travel to their initial bus stop. And we basically picked the 75th percentile, or the point where 75% of adults are willing to travel to the bus stop, and use that as the cutoff to determine what is too far likely for older adults to want to walk to a bus stop. And that 75th percentile point ended up being about 1,200 feet, or about a quarter of a mile. And by using that threshold, we wanted to see throughout all of Marion County how many older adults live farther than that threshold from a fixed transit route. And we made an estimate of about 76,000 older adults. And this is just based on kind of residential parcel data. Again, a lot of estimating here, but we tried the best we could. We took actual residential parcel data throughout all of Marion County and took the points from the center of all those parcels to bus stops, and then basically made estimates based on populations of age 65 plus adults in each census tract to make these estimates. So happy to talk about this more in the Q&A, but a lot went into this estimate. So while it's not perfect, it's an approximation that there are a lot of older adults likely living too far from a bus stop to likely use it, which supports previous research that there is a big difference between whether or not you're a quarter of a mile or an eighth of a mile from a bus stop with likelihood of using the public transit. And this map essentially mimics our map of where older adults live in Marion County, as well as oppositely maps transit density, where there's a really low amount of older adults in the middle of Marion County who are likely too far from a bus stop to readily access. But on the outskirts, there are a lot of older adults who likely live too far to readily use public transit. So basically, this goes to show that there seems to be some definitely statistically significant differences between the older adult population, how far they're willing to travel to the initial bus stop, but not necessarily from the final bus stop to their final destination. So this kind of barrier from the origin to initial bus stop is one worth potentially considering more, and also supports why the on-demand transit systems are so important and pertinent for older adults, because it actually goes and picks them up from from like their home, for example, instead of them having to walk to a fixed transit system, which segues me into the kind of the second part of this talk, looking at our findings with more of the actual demand transit and expanding to more of the greater central Indiana area and not just within Marion County. And what we wanted to look at was, we know that demand transit is really important for older adult accessibility within central Indiana. Well, we wanted to get a better idea of quantifying the potential efficiencies or inefficiencies associated with these demand transit services. So what we did was we basically agglomerated all this data from the Indiana Department of Transportation, as well as some data from Indigo, to look at This and this is in the report actually broken down by each specific transit agency throughout all of Indiana. But here I have it summarized kind of more conveniently by category. And what we looked at was expenditures by the agency per rider. So how much money does the transit agency spend per ridership, as well as the expenditures, or how much money the transit agency spends per total vehicle mile traveled by the bus system. So first, I want to point out the expenditures per rider. And what we see is that Indigo Access specifically, which is a paratransit service throughout Marion County and particularly that targets older adults, is the most expensive per rider, how much it spends per rider. And on average, the urban demand response and rural demand response services are more expensive than any of the fixed route systems throughout Indiana, including the Indigo Indianapolis large fixed route system. But what's important to note is when we now look at this from a total vehicle mile perspective, that this basically flips, where you look at the fixed route systems are actually more expensive for the transit agency per total vehicle mile traveled, whereas the Indigo Access and these demand response services, for example, paratransit, any kind of service where you're getting picked up, these are cheaper per total vehicle mile traveled. And the reasoning behind that is that these demand services oftentimes have to drive a lot further per individual to pick them up, which drives up the total vehicle miles, but drives up the cost per person because it takes longer to get to each individual as opposed to a fixed route system. In particular, we see this with Indigo Access because Indigo Access actually has a really awesome plan with accessibility for older adults, in that essentially anyone within Marion County who qualifies under the American Disabilities Act can get picked up for Indigo Access. Whereas legally, if it's usually in cities, it's only within 3/4 of a mile of a fixed route system, but Indigo Access will go anywhere throughout Marion County to pick up an eligible individual, which does bring down the total cost per vehicle mile, but does bring up the cost per rider. So just a lot of data to consider here in regards to expenditures per these different transit forms throughout Indiana. And going more now into the specific transit options within central Indiana, that we want to point out before we dive more into this, that each county in central Indiana does have at least one demand response service. Again, these are services like paratransit and basically where you can pick up an older adult or any individual directly from their home and get them to where they need to be. And there are a lot of robust services available, but what we've noticed with our focus groups and talking with people, that there are complex and there's some difficult interrelated things that can be tricky to navigate, particularly with cross-county trips and scheduling ahead. So what we wanted to do is point out some theoretical case study examples where we use fictional people, but with real world scenarios to try to illustrate some of the nuance between these kind of cross-county connections or demand services within certain central Indiana counties. For example, in one of our examples, and we go more in depth within the actual research brief, but we talk about this theoretical person, Stacy, who's 67. They live alone. They don't have a car, and they need to get downtown from Johnson County, downtown Indianapolis from Johnson County, particularly to go to Eskenazi Health for a health appointment. And basically, if during the week, if they wanted to go there through an affordable means through the fixed transit service, it takes a really long time. So theoretically, if they wanted to leave from Johnson County Courthouse to downtown Indianapolis and get to Eskenazi Health for their medical appointment, they can do so very affordably. One-way cost for this long trip is only $2.75. The downside, though, is that it takes over 3 hours one way for Stacy to get from Johnson County to downtown Indianapolis to get to her medical appointment, which can make it difficult to make to this appointment on time. And then she also has to figure out how to get back to Johnson County from Indianapolis, which will take probably an additional 3 hours or so. So again, while this is affordable and reliable, the amount of time can be a deterrent for people that don't have car access and need to get to important health appointments that might not be accessible within their own county. But there are also potential solutions to this, right? Such as potentially having more regional transit, rapid transit connectivity, or other subsidized ride sharing options. Our next example is we're going to navigate from southern central Indiana to now northwest central Indiana and talk about our theoretical gentleman named Harry, who is married and currently is not working. They just retired, and their spouse takes the car during the day because they still work. And while Harry could use the service in Boone County called Boone County Senior Services for scheduling for, say, an important medical appointment or whatnot, if it's known well in advance, if he wants to go and do, say, an impromptu trip to Walmart to get a few things around the house while his wife is away, it's much more difficult to find a transit option that's affordable to get there. For example, for the Boone County Senior Services, you have to call sometimes 1 to 2 weeks ahead, which makes it difficult for these more impromptu trips. And while that is affordable, Harry doesn't really have options to get to, say, the store for a quick day-to-day pickup of non-essential items without planning ahead. And again, there are potential solutions for this, such as subsidized ride sharing. But again, this is just an example of a very likely scenario that older adults experience to show some of the potential gaps in transit accessibility and within central Indiana. Our last example we want to talk about was a limitation that's commonly experienced by older adults as they age, such as difficulty driving at night. So our example here is Gertrude and Jerry, this theoretical couple who lives in Morgan County, and they have a Bible study as an important social outlet they like to attend to every week. Unfortunately, the Bible study doesn't start until 6:30 or 6 p.m. And the only transit available in Morgan County through Morgan County Connect ends its service at 5 p.m. So unfortunately, Gertrude and Jerry can't safely complete the trip unless they do some form of carpooling or demand response that has extended hours of some sort or subsidized ride sharing. So again, this just shows a theoretical example, but a real world problem that many people face in trying to get from point A to point B, particularly with some limitations experienced with aging and with the limitations experienced with some of the demand services in the underlying counties of central Indiana. So collectively taking into account the data that we've looked at and these examples throughout both Marion County and central Indiana as a whole, it definitely is apparent that in order for there to be efficient kind of financially sustainable ways to improve transit access, that at least we think that there's likely needs to be coordinated development between the transit agencies and communities that throughout central Indiana. So as more development is done, particularly with older adult housing specifically, if there's coordinated development with that and transit agencies, there's a better likelihood there could be more cost-efficient transit services and cross-county connectivity potentially. Again, we're just kind of presenting this here. We don't have all the policy answers and whatnot, but this is just what was clear to us in looking at the data and the current limitations throughout central Indiana. And this is something that particularly is evident as through some of our survey responses I'm about to share with looking at the need for and desire of where older adults want to live in central Indiana. And the other thing that's really important that I wanted to point out and throughout that we learned throughout this research brief, and that we actually cite a paper that recently talks about this in our online version of our research brief, is that there are really a lack of quantitative measures of ease of access to transit services, specifically for older adults and demand transit service. So there's not really much data available, for example, for how far in advance older adults on average have to schedule appointments with demand services, how long they end up waiting for demand response that might not be on time, how much of excess or lack of excess vehicles there are for demand response to meet the needs of older adults. There's just not a lot of quantitative data to really assess and evaluate kind of how effectively some of these demand response services are actually serving the older adult population from a data analytics standpoint. And there's a lot going on right now throughout Indianapolis and Marion County, and as well as central Indiana and Indiana as a whole, looking at a lot of these issues we just talked about, and I'm sure the panelists will touch on more today through things like Health by Design Network, the Indigo Future Service Plan, some pilot microtransit programs like Driven to Success and whatnot. So there's a lot of exciting development going on. And the last thing I wanted to point out was this actual survey data that kind of backs up this idea of connectivity between transit services and new housing development. So albeit this data is a little bit outdated from 2018, it does illustrate the story that among older adults, in this case, baby boomers specifically, there is a demand for transit-oriented housing in walkable neighborhoods where older adults want to live and reside. For example, about 25% of those surveyed in central Indiana were interested in moving in the next few years to a destination that has sidewalks and walkability and public transit access. For example, 40% said that sidewalks and cultural amenities are really important in the place that they want to live, and that 25% wanted to live in an area where there's walkable distance to shops and restaurants. And that tied in with that, though, was this important component of public transit access, where 20% wanted to live in a place where there was available public transit access. And again, these are people that are willing to move in the next several years. So there is this demand for housing that is kind of in conjunction with public transit and walkable neighborhoods where it might be easier to develop a more efficient and effective transit response network across counties for older adults. So to wrap up, if you take away nothing else from this presentation, that when we quantify it, there are a lot of older adults in central Indiana, tens of thousands that live too far likely from fixed transit to readily use. So and this just backs up the evidence that there are a lot of older adults who rely on demand transit services. But when looking from an efficiency standpoint, from the cost per transit agency, we see that demand transit, both rural and urban, are the most expensive per rider throughout Indiana, and particularly central Indiana. But this isn't necessarily the case in total vehicle miles traveled, but that's because these demand response services have to travel a lot further per individual because of the inefficiencies and how things are connected within central Indiana and Indiana as a whole. Older adults are likely to travel they travel the shortest distance on average to bus stops from their point of origin, which illustrates a potential mobility limitation and further backs why demand transit is so important. But moving forward, that through survey data, there is a demand for communities moving forward where older adults want transit accessibility, and that can help facilitate potential partnerships between transit and the community development moving forward. So with that, again, I just want to point out the thanks for the Central Indiana Senior Fund and the Central Indiana Community Foundation for the State of Aging report and this research brief. And again, this is going to be sent out to all participants following this presentation. The actual presentation will be sent out along with links to the actual research brief, which goes much more into detail with some of the things I talked about today. And there's also a link here to the State of Aging website, where we not just only have reports on transit equity and accessibility for older adults, but other things like financial stability as well for the whole aging population. And there's a lot of things there that I think will be of interest to people that are here today. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Jill and to facilitate an excellent discussion with our panelists.
Thank you, Matt. And a lot of great information there, a lot to digest and get through as we are considering seniors, public transportation in central Indiana. So I hope everybody is able to take a look at that report this morning or afterwards and share it. We do want to remind everyone that we will be taking questions and answer during the panel session and after the panel session today. So please do feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A this morning. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel. We've got a great panel this morning. We have joining us Michael Roth, who is Senior Director with Indigo Mobility Solutions. Lakeisha Jackson is here with us this morning. She is City County Councilor for District 14. Jennifer Higginbotham is the Principal Planner for Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization. And we also have with us this morning Karen Brooks, who is Director of Way to Go, and that is at SoCOA. So welcome everyone again this morning. Michael, I'd like to go around and just have everyone introduce themselves again and sort of speak to what your job is and how this issue touches the work that you do. And so Michael, I believe we'll start with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jill. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Roth. I am the Senior Director of Mobility Solutions here at Indigo. My overall job responsibilities are truly working with our paratransit program, Indigo Access, to assist individuals to, one, get them linked to the service if they're eligible, and to oversee that entire program. the aging of adults, which is, true to all of our hearts, because we're all aging. We may not like it, but we are. But it is an issue currently in Indianapolis, and I know Indigo has been working effortlessly to try to fill some of the gaps that we have with our transit program. I think you'll hear from our peers, my peers on this call, on different solutions that Indigo and others, SoAR, the IMPO, are working on to improve the transportation statuses and provide more frequent and better coverage of the network. So that's me. Hello, everyone.
Thank you,
You're
Michael. On to Lakeisha Jackson. Go ahead and introduce yourself if you would this morning, Lakeisha, and tell us a little bit about you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lakeisha Jackson. I am City County Councilor of Indianapolis, currently District 14, representing on the far east side of Indianapolis, both Lawrence and Warren townships. Also, I have the honor of being the CEO of Pathway Resource Center, which is a grassroots organization also located on the far east side of Indianapolis. I've had the desire or compassion to serve people since I was a little girl. So on the City County Council, I serve as a chairwoman of community affairs, and I did a disparity study commission report that came out in 2019. And one of those things centered around transportation. How do we help close transportation gaps in our city? Secondly, 10 years ago, before I even got on the council, I've been on the council for 8 years now. As I was a community leader before I got on the council, in the trenches with others, determining how one of the things I saw, poverty, food access, but transportation was at the wheelhouse. How do we do that? And so as the years went on, the two kind of married together, my work that I do for the not-for-profit and the council, and just the driving combination of force was there at the wheelhouse again was transportation. So I created and founded the first microtransit system here in Indianapolis with some great partners. They helped me pull it to make it come to fruition. And one of those partners is here, and we'll talk about a little bit later, but Driven to Success, my first microtransit system here in Indianapolis. And so that is my role, and the need, and seniors is really at the great need of that. So that's where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Jackson. On to Jen Higginbotham, Principal Planner for IMPO. Jen, you do a lot of this work, obviously, and have a lot of insight into this issue. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, as Jill said, I'm Jen Higginbotham. I've been with the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization for about 10 years now. We're an organization that looks at transportation and needs in the region regionally. So we're looking at all of Marion County, but also parts of 8 of the surrounding counties. And we were very active when the IndyConnect initiative was going on. We were very strong partners with Indigo. We worked tirelessly, many meetings trying to make sure that we could try to improve the Marion County transit system. We also, in the last 6 months, or actually the last year and a half or so, we have helped it's near the town of Plainfield, but it's the township, Guilford Township in Hendricks County. They created a transit plan for their area, and we supported that, and also one for Northern Johnson County. So we have been working in this field for quite a while now.
Thank you so much, Jen. And finally today on our panel, we have Karen Brooks, who is the director with Way to Go program at SoAR. Karen, good morning.
Welcome, Jill. Thank you for having me. Good morning, everybody. My name's Karen Brooks. I'm the director of our Way to Go Transportation Department, which is a division of SoAR Aging and In-Home Solutions. SoAR is the largest council on aging in Indiana, and our mission is to empower older adults, those of any age with a disability, and their caregivers by providing the innovative answers, services, and support they need to achieve the greatest possible independence, dignity, and quality of life. My passion for being a director is to be able to help people. And just like Lakeisha, that started when I was a little girl as I became a caregiver for my father, who was a brittle diabetic and became very sick. That started at the age of 8. And when I found out about the mission of SoAR, one of the things that was lacking 30 plus years ago was transportation for people to get back and forth to dialysis. So this has pulled at my heartstrings for many, many, many years. And I'm excited to work with Michael and Jen and others to be able to provide additional resources here in, central Indiana for clients that, need transportation resources. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone, for being here. As you can tell, we have a very inclusive and varied panel this morning with a lot of experts working on this issue. So again, please feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A and we'll get started. Jen, I'd like to maybe start with you. We're looking at the report. We really see a disconnect. Seniors are more living on the fringes of Marion County. We don't have, with the transportation, fixed transportation routes that we do have are centrally located. It's obvious when you look at the maps that, this is an issue. And I think anyone that's, explored Marion County public transportation has seen that, it's not comprehensive, to say the least, maybe, and that you're all obviously working on this issue. But when you look at the report and you see such a disconnect, and you hear that seniors are not satisfied with the transit options here in Marion County, where does that work start? Where are you seeing, Jen, real success as you really look closely at this issue for seniors?
Yeah, so from my opinion and some of my other colleagues at the MPO, I did sort of discuss this issue with them before coming to the panel. And there has been some amazing strides made in Marion County the last few years. A referendum was passed to increase funding so that we could expand the transit system. Bus rapid transit lines are going in. It's really amazing. But the thing is, if somebody wants to live away from the transit lines, it's going to be very difficult for them to receive service. You saw the costs for the paratransit services and the on-demand services. They're just never going to be able to serve somebody the way that a person will be able to live if they have access to those fixed transit routes. We do want to take into consideration that, there is a difference between seniors who still have, seniors and older adults who still have a lot of their mobility, but perhaps they just don't want to drive or can't drive. And the seniors who have lost a majority of their mobility, and maybe they can't even use transit if they had it. So there's a huge chunk of the population that perhaps doesn't want to drive, but they still want to have the freedom to go to the grocery store when they want and to get to healthcare on their own without asking someone. And so that's where we really need to look into the development patterns and try to figure out how we can build more options for these older adults to live near these transit lines. And that may be in the form of independent living facilities. A lot of these that are coming online in central Indiana are locating on the fringes where they're getting greenfield development, and they're very detached from any sort of already existing transit opportunities. So that's where I come in. It's, it's just very difficult to try to bring the transit to the people when it comes to every person that lives anywhere. It's much easier to try to come up with solutions to build places for people to live where they can live independently and they can, live their lives with a lot more freedom, just by maybe, moving into these areas where they can not only take transit, but they can walk on a daily basis. I had a grandmother who, when she stopped driving, she moved into a facility near in Terre Haute, but sort of near downtown Terre Haute, but in a main area where she could walk every day. And, she didn't drive, but she could walk every day. There was a bus stop a block and a half from her facility. And she had a full apartment, a full kitchen, a full bedroom, everything. So we need more of these sorts of options for seniors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that, walkability and transit oriented, planning is all really something that we've been able to wrap our heads around in the past couple of years, but something that we definitely need to focus on a little more clearly. And with that in mind, Michael and Indigo has been doing this work. I mean, pretty pointedly now for a number of years with success, and despite some pushback from sectors in and around the state. What do you see, from Indigo's perspective, that is really working for older adults in Marion County? We have the Purple Line coming to Lakeisha's neighborhood. These types of developments in transit are really critical and really do build on that density that we want, that the way of living that we can, create for seniors. What's working, from your mindset in Indigo?
Right. Thank you, Jill. I think that what is working is that it's critical that we, of course, are listening to the community and listening to what their needs are, and working with the community to make sure that we are at least trying to address those needs. Just like Jen said, it's hard to get transit to everybody, especially when they're on the outer layer of the Marion County. And that's where the Indigo access comes into play, because we will go the entire Marion County. So regardless if there's a fixed route or not, Indigo access will provide service in that area. So individuals just have to be eligible for the service. Another thing is with Lakeisha Jackson, CEO Jackson, Councilor Jackson, the microtransit program. What Indigo is doing is we're trying to be very innovative with providing transportation services within areas that have the low fixed routes or no fixed routes available at all. Lakeisha will speak here about microtransits and the success that she has had with this program. What we're doing is reaching out. When I say we, Indigo, I apologize. What Indigo is doing is looking at the communities that need more specific service in an area and working to see what we can provide. I think another thing that we have been working on for the past couple of years is more of a regional coordination of transportation with our peers. I think all of us on the panel were leaders in our work, and our commitment is that we want to provide the equal transportation across the field to address everyone's needs. Now, is that realistic? Will it take time? Yes, it's going to take a lot of time, but regionally as a group, I think we need to come together more, and we started this. We need to come together more and really have those heart-to-heart discussions. How can we as a group provide services to individuals using all of our services in one way, one day, to get everybody to where they need. So that's going to take a lot of time and energy, but I think we're all committed to continue to work on that.
So Lakeisha, yeah, building off of that, you have this project in your district, the microtransit project. Tell us what that is and how people have responded. What are the stories you're hearing?
This microtransit program actually now started as a project, has actually turned into a program. It is to reduce the transportation gap for Far East Side residents, specifically focusing on Black and Brown communities, those underserved, who lack dedicated transportation to essential places like medical facilities, employment, grocery or food access, and childcare are the initial ones we started with. We deemed those because we had to look for funding in order to get sustainability. So that's something that we pitched, and those were the major ones that we saw after surveying and talking to residents and stakeholders that they saw, and talking to employers, the need there for employment. And how it kind of formulated was, had the idea and the vision, kind of, dated or courted Indigo for a while. And then the Social Innovation Grant came up with United Way, and we were awarded that money. Was it enough? So went back to Indigo and courted and said, hey, if we could put the two together, we could make this project happen as a pilot program. What are your thoughts? CEO Evans was right on it. And she said, Council Jackson, whatever you need, we are there. So the two came together as our major sponsors or partners with this, with my idea. We formed it out. We're still developing it out. Now we have grown. Now we're going to the effective in January. We'll expand to, so we're in 4 zip codes, 46219, 46226, 46229, and 46235. And so you have to live in a zip code, and the boundaries, there are set boundaries, and it's on demand. So it picks you up and you call you set up within 48 hours. You schedule a ride. Even youth can take it to school as long as they're 14 or older, because we don't have chaperones. So with that whole thing, they have to be 14 or older in order to take it. But we do have the flexibility to take youth to school. We have wheelchair accessibility. These are ADA compliant. We are paratransit partner of Indigo, and it's meeting the needs of, as of today, we have over 3,500 riderships.
That's fantastic.
And that's as of April, first week of April. We're just now going the first week of December, going into the second week of December. So this shows you it's effective, as he says, for an area that has low or fixed or no routes. And this was to service that area. And what's unique about this, Jill, and thank you for the opportunity inviting me to speak. We have done this with minimum advertisement, because as we were building this, we had hiccups. As you start any new project, program, or business, there's a extreme learning curve. And so we had to get through this learning curve, because this is almost a new business within the business for us as a not-for-profit. And so as we were kicking this thing off, until we get the kinks, because what you don't want to do is flood marketing out, and then you don't have all the kinks worked out, and then you got a long line of people. So imagine when we full speed, that more people know about Driven to Success, the need is going to be so, the weight for what we're doing will be so much great. So we would love more partners. We thank Indigo and United Way for jumping on board with us as being the initial partners. But what we're turning this is to a local model in the state to be a national model. We've already got people that want to come on board to form this out to support us. This is great. And this is where seniors, a lot of our riders are seniors. They don't have family members, or a lot of their family members are working during the day. They need that ADA accessibility. They're in walkers or wheelchairs. Their family members or Lyft, or those are great services, but they don't have the equipment to what they need to provide for them, to get them to, and it's front doors, door to door. And other thing I'll say about our seniors is that the care we give, so we get customer service with this. So the customer service, if they can't, we help them. We have staff to help them. And this comes with a family advocate. So if they have more needs other than the transportation needs, we can link them to a family advocate to do case management. That's beyond and above a transportation service.
Oh, that's huge.
Our seniors use that, and they have been using that. So if they need food, so even if they want to the food pantry, we can get access to that. If they need referrals for supporter services, Medicaid to Medicare, to get them to a Medicare, there's substance abuse going on, anything they need, we can get them assistance linked up for that.
That's huge, making those connections. And obviously, without any marketing, you're already getting so many people. I mean, there's a need. You can easily see that people will come if you build it and you build it right.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I left off.
No.
So effective January, we'll expand into zip codes 05 and 18. Michael, I think I shared that with you. That's what we're doing.
Congratulations. Karen, the report really sort of took a deep dive into, the places that seniors are going in our community, faith-based groups and organizations, healthcare visits, obviously, and, the daily things, the grocery, obviously is hugely important for anyone in our community. What other uses are you seeing that, seniors really need to be invested in when we're talking about public transportation? What other needs and gaps are you hearing from people?
Well, some of the gaps that I hear, of course, are the barriers that keep them from using the fixed route service. But,
Mm.
I think that some of the barriers that we find is that, at SoCoA, we take a person-centered approach,
Mm.
meaning that we meet the people where they're at. And our services are a little bit different compared to some of the other services available, meaning that we are a door-to-door transportation service, but we also get out of our vehicle and go to the door, the threshold of the door, to help the client, assist them from their door out into our vehicle. One of the things that, our consumers have talked to us about is the fact that time, how important is time emphasis, meaning that sometimes, we all have our time as far as keeping up with our schedules, but sometimes it's not easy for a client to be able to get out, get their shoes on, tied, and get dressed and out to a vehicle in 5 minutes. Where we try to take that person and meet their needs and take the time to give them ample amount of time to get out to the vehicle and try to, again, meet them, their needs where they're at. I think that a lot of the barriers with transportation right now that we see are the cross-county transports. We have for years, we were running a program or operating a program that allowed cross-county transports where it allowed clients to be able to remain in one vehicle, and they were, instead of having to meet at a county line to do a cross-county connect. Because right now, most of us, our funding is specific, and it says this is specifically for Marion County. We want you to use it for seniors and those with disabilities, but we want you to remain within Marion County. Well, as statistics have shown, it's really hard to do a cross-county transport. Let's say that you have a veteran that lives up in Hamilton County that needs to get down to the VA hospital. SoCoA is really taken an approach at we have a program called the My Freedom Program, which we have worked with Indigo and CERTA on, and we are revamping that program to be able to provide nothing but cross-county transportation for that. And taking a look at finding providers who would be willing to do those cross-county transports and to be paid by SoCoA, and the client to only have to have a very discounted rated cost associated with that. And we're finding some barriers when it comes to insurance requirements. We're finding some barriers with providers and who want to accept these vouchers to be able to do cross-county transports. And let's face it, the increase in our economic system out there today, everything is increasing. So we're really taking a comprehensive look at revamping this program and helping to bridge that gap for cross-county transportation. So I would say that that's probably one of our biggest barriers.
Yeah.
Now, we do provide at SoCoA, we have our senior transportation program, and we provide transports for medical appointments, pharmacy runs, and grocery shopping services. And we really had to dive deep down into that and figure out those most essential needs for clients to be able to remain at home versus that institutionalized care. And, as we take a look at the CSOA survey, you see that 28%, so more than a quarter of the people that took that survey have said they have issues and barriers with transportation. So as others have alluded to, Michael and Jen and everybody, we all want to work together to have a strong partnership to help the community in any way that we can. And for all of us to be successful, we have to work together. So I am fully committed and have been vested for well over 11 years in transportation. And it is my hope that maybe someday my dream would be to see us have a centralized scheduling and our dispatching software system where we could help each other out, meaning that let's say that I we dropped off a consumer at Community North, and our driver is now down at Eskenazi Hospital down in central Indiana. It would be great if I could reach out to Mike and say, hey, Mike, I see that you have a driver that's at Community North. Can you take that run and take them home? And I'll pick up your client from Eskenazi and take them home. So it's cost beneficial for both of us. And at the same time, we're providing an excellent service to the community and partnering together to do the best that we can. So that is my hope, and that is my commitment moving forward.
Let's do that. It's year 2022. It feels like we should be able to do that. I mean, that seems like a simple solution that we could take advantage of. And especially when you're talking about such a large area and people, like you said, across counties. Jen, how is that work going? We've long heard that it's been difficult to get, partners and leaders the buy-in for transit services. And we know that, again, looking at the report, that a lot of seniors in our community are sort of living on the fringes. How's that work going as we try to expand out a little bit more?
So, as I mentioned during my introduction, the MPO has been working with a couple of we kind of refer to them as the suburban communities in some of their transit planning. So I mentioned town of Plainfield, and I mentioned Northern Johnson County. I know that the town of Plainfield would like to talk to the state about trying to adjust the referendum rules so that they could potentially try to pass a referendum just with the town and not with the township, just because we have a couple of different communities in central Indiana that are also on the same boat, where the township is maybe not on board, but the town really wants it. So there may be some discussions like that going forward, but it is a cooperative effort. Everybody's going to have to work together. There's already some services that are running through CERTA, the Central Indiana Regional Transportation Authority. They run a few bus lines out to Plainfield, to the warehouse districts, primarily to get people to work, but also up to Whitestown and to those areas to get people to work. So there are some cross-county partnerships going on. They meet with Indigo in the middle so that they can get people from one county to the other, primarily for jobs. It is a daytime running service. But some of the other agencies, Access Johnson County, and Janus up in Hamilton County, they all meet on a regular basis, and they all try to talk to each other about how can we be more collaborative, how can we work together. There is a study going on right now. CERTA is running a study where a consultant is looking at the opportunities to sort of coordinate that software and try to make it so that these agencies can talk to each other better. Not sure what the outcomes are going to be on that, and I'm not sure when it's going to be finished, but I do know that it's happening right now. So there are conversations happening, and I know that all of the providers in the region are trying to work together to come to the same solutions.
Mm-hmm. Michael, when we talk about, trying to create more transit-oriented development, we know that Indigo, the Red Line has provided quicker service on the north-south route, and we now have the Purple Line coming to the east side of Indianapolis, or all the way across 38th. When we're thinking about developing, areas like this with more density, like we would like to have seniors in areas that were more easily accessible to a fixed line, and especially a rapid fixed line. Did we see some success on the Red Line? How are we moving forward trying to get more seniors accessibility to that option?
That is a wonderful question, Jill. And I wish I had the answer to be able to give you. Indigo is trying to be very strategic where we put and where the rapid transportation lines are built. And whether it's the Purple Line or the future Blue Line going from the east to the airport, it's creating a more accessible transportation system across communities. And I think as the Red Line, the Purple Line, and the Blue Line were developed, it really was the goal to get all and any faster service, more frequent service, and address the needs of all the customers that we have. As we move forward, again, I think it's going to be very important that we continue working on this regional coordination. We work on more of the microtransits to meet the needs of seniors living in the outlying areas. And it's going to take a lot of work, but just like my peers, we're all committed to provide a better service and especially service the needs of our seniors. So I'm not sure.
And can I pitch in on that just a little bit?
Please go ahead. Please.
So the MPO Indigo and City of Indianapolis did, I'm bad at time, but like a year, 2 years ago, whatever it's been now, work together on updating the City of Indianapolis's zoning ordinances. And one thing that was passed was a transit-oriented development overlay district, and it will overlap the rapid transit lines. And the idea there was to make it less difficult for developers to build more density around those rapid transit lines. And there has been evidence of a lot of that happening even before the overlay was fully passed and executed. There were a lot of developers on the red line getting variances, trying to build more density. There's just been a ton of new density built around the red line. I think some of the conversations that maybe haven't been had enough are getting away from sort of what government can specifically do in a regulatory manner, which is things that they've already been trying to do with the ordinances and whatnot, and having conversations about why is it that the new healthcare providers, the new urgent care centers, the new grocery stores, all of these things that are essential to older adult older adult daily life are being located on greenfields. And I know why. It's in the areas that are really easy to build on because they don't have to deal with neighboring properties and they don't have to deal with utilities as much. So it is a lot cheaper for them to build in those areas, but it doesn't do as much service to providing the sort of accessibility that we would like to get in the community. So I think there can be more conversations as time goes on with some of the major developers in the area, and especially national chains and things like that that are looking to put in, new Myers and new Walmarts and whatever. Like, can we start putting those in the areas where people can get to them by transit, and especially new employers are putting things in areas that are very difficult to access without transit. And so yeah, it's ongoing conversations, but there have been a lot more density built along the red line, and that is absolutely going to happen along the purple line as well.
And then the next move to be able to locate seniors in those more dense areas, if they even want to be located in those areas. I know obviously, a lot of people in our population, older people, are in their homes and staying in the neighborhoods that they've always lived in because they want to be there. I'm sure, Lakeisha, you see a lot of that on the Far East Side, and know that the people in your district, are there because that's where they live. That's the neighborhood that they want to be in. And so we need to bring these options to them, as you have with your micro transit. What are you hearing, Lakeisha, from people in your district, the older generation that is really needs to be able to use public transportation, but might not necessarily have it, but are excited that there are more options coming again, with the purple line? Well, are you hearing that people are excited about the options? And she might have stepped away, so that's okay. We'll keep going on, and Karen, I'll ask you, when we're looking at the report and we're seeing that, seniors, they're willing to travel, an eighth of a mile maybe, but not a quarter of a mile. That's not a very large difference, but it is a very large difference if if your walking is impaired, or if you just can't walk as many steps as you used to, or just aren't able. When we're talking about trying to get somewhere when we're using public transportation, what's really important for seniors, and how can we better make those moves to make sure that they aren't missing out on opportunities to get to where they need to go?
Well, I think one of the big barriers that we've talked about is having sidewalks and having a safe way
Oh,
for people to be able to get
yeah.
to the bus lines. And in a lot of our older neighborhoods, we don't have clear pathways to ensure that clients will, remain safe as they're trying to get to that bus line. That's where we have our demand response, and that a person that uses demand response has they have to have a medical verification form filled out, meaning that they have some sort of a disability that prohibits them from using the regular rapid transit system. And I think it's just, again, meeting the people where they're at. We've got some people that might even live a quarter of a mile from the bus, stop, but that doesn't mean that they can walk a quarter of a mile. And then you've got others that are able to walk, 3/4 of a mile to be able to get to, a bus stop. So I think it's just having clear pathways, clear means of a way for them to get there safely. If they're utilizing a wheelchair, we can't, and they don't have a sidewalk to utilize. Sometimes our streets are not always the easiest to travel on either when you look at potholes and different things like that. And I think that sometimes we don't think about those barriers that our older adults are seeing. And I think that, having a better, like I said, clear way for them to get there is something of great importance for them to be able to utilize the service.
Yeah, we need a lot of work to do on that front as well. And I know that's why a lot of people are excited about, rapid transit, because it brings that infrastructure as well. And it brings, those pieces closer to the transit. And so I think that's really important. Jen, maybe you could talk a little bit, building off of that about, older adults versus seniors who literally can't drive. I mean, there's obviously a difference of the population, and how can we be inclusive to all when we're thinking about public transportation for seniors? I mean, some people literally cannot drive, and others it's just an inconvenience.
Yeah, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm against sort of these on-demand services. They're a very critical part of a holistic transit system. All of it has to kind of work together. It's just that relying on the on-demand services alone cannot possibly serve every human being that has a need to be mobile and get out and do things and live independently in their daily life. So that's really what I'm kind of emphasizing, is just that, like, it's a holistic system, and we need to be looking at all of it and make sure that it's all working in the most efficient way that it can work. But that doesn't just mean that it's transit's responsibility or transit providers' responsibilities to make sure that these people are served. We also need to talk about development patterns and about, as Karen said, sidewalk conditions and all of these things that contribute to a senior or an older adult being able to live their life. There are always going to be those adults who need a lot more support and are going to need that on-demand service to come, and the driver to get out of the vehicle and help them actually like step up or, get their wheelchair loaded. And those are very critical sort of parts of the whole system. But we do want to make sure that those seniors who maybe just choose not to drive because, I don't know how much longer my mom's going to be driving. She just hates it. So, once they either choose not to drive or they just can't, or maybe they can't afford an insurance payment anymore, there's a lot of reasons why an older adult would stop driving. We want to make sure that if they are otherwise still mobile, that they have those opportunities to continue to be mobile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's hugely important, like you said. Michael, let's talk a little bit about, the eligibility, building off of that, because not everyone is eligible for the on-demand services. And we have to, make sure that we're still able to access people that might, again, need a different level. What are the eligibility, and is there any flexibility there?
So eligibility is based on an individual's ability to ride or use our fixed route system. It's not based on age. It's not based on disability. It's not based on financial needs. It truly is based on the ability to use and get to a fixed route. With that being said, as we've already discussed here in Indy, we have infrastructure issues, roads, sidewalks, cutaway areas for people crossing the street. So there's a lot of infrastructure issues. We the flexibility that we have is that if the person who is applying for the service lives in an area that accessibility to a fixed route is impaired by infrastructure, we can be flexible and provide service to that individual and make them maybe conditionally approved for the Indigo access. And conditionally would mean maybe I don't ride 5 days a week. Maybe I just use it when I have to go to the doctor. Because our Indigo access is an origin to destination, which door to door, and not everybody needs it, 5 days a week. Someone may need just to go to the grocery. Someone may need to go again to medical appointments. So they can have conditional eligibility that gets them to where they need to go. And again, if it's for appointments and things like that. So to answer the other part of your question, if they are not eligible, that is again where I have to rely on our partners. I'll make phone calls on our customers' behalfs to see, can you provide this service to this customer? So again, it's a lot of networking, a lot of coordinating. We have a lot of work as a group, this whole regional coordination, that's going to be key to help provide all the gap, to close the gap is by myself being able to call Karen, and just like the example Karen used, hey, there's somebody located here, I'll get them, we'll get one of your customers. Having an integrated fare system and an integrated call center is going to be key and very crucial to develop this core control center, if you will, that can actually dispatch trips to other providers so that we can get individuals, whether or not they're seniors, just anyone in the population, right? Now, we, of course, can't get everybody where they need to go all the time, but again, we just need to really work on this regional transportation. And I know Ryan Wilhite at Indigo has worked with, I'm sure, Jen, working on with Karen and trying to get us more linked together as we are continuing the conversations. It really is truly going to take time, though, to get that system in place. Let's say an effective system that works.
Mm-hmm. Lakeisha, I was interested in knowing, what you're hearing from people in your council district in the Far East side. You've got, a bus rapid transit line coming to your neighborhood. You've got, the micro transit program. What are you hearing from people about their plans to use these services? Are they excited? Do they, not care? Like, what are you hearing from your constituents?
Oh, they're definitely excited. So residents on the Far East Side, the more they hear about it, and it's inclusive for everyone. So the more they hear about it, the more they're excited to take part of it. You can be anyone to use the microtransit system. So it's open for everyone, and they're just excited. People, even businesses and stakeholders, are spreading the word to try to get people to use the service. So we're excited, and our community is excited about this opportunity that's been made available to connect more open availability of services for transportation services.
I mean, I know that, we got some work to do with, walkable neighborhoods on the Far East Side. What can policymakers do to, really make changes, do you think, as a policymaker yourself, to really make sure that we're doing this right?
I think we need to work on policy changes around walkability, pedestrian policies, connectivity from on walkability to public transit. I think also and more input into infrastructure that around public and transit as a whole. And then that comes from our just legislation, not just a local, that's just legislation period. And I know that the federal government just did major funding in microtransit. I just learned just in the last 3 weeks, 30 days, that they have prioritized public transit or transit, and specifically microtransit. So I'm trying to explore that and what does that mean for Indiana. But that's where it starts and it trickles down to us. But as legislators, what does it mean for policy for our constituents, for our residents? I think the two need to go hand in hand. We need the funding, but we need policy. And what does that policy looks like for safety reasons? What does it look like for better infrastructure? And what does it look like for connectivity?
It feels like, sometimes policy makers, lawmakers, don't prioritize this issue, but it would be nice to see a little more focus in what we can really do, especially when we're considering seniors. Karen, there was a little bit in the report that talked about, how the option to be mobile, how the option to get to where you want to go really decreases depression. And I know our seniors, face isolation a lot of times, especially the past couple of years. How important is that connection? And what are you hearing from people that are doing it successfully, are using successful transit options, and those who are not, maybe?
Well, what we hear from people and of course, what we want to do is make sure that they understand that we are hearing them, is hearing the need again for meeting them where they, meeting them at where they're at, person-centered, making sure that we are, if they need that additional assistance and they need an additional 10 minutes to get out to the vehicle, that we're helping with that and we're helping to make that happen. I think that dependability, reliability, and having some trust factors. We've got a wonderful group of drivers who are out there on the front line every day who kind of become like family members to these clients. Clients like to be able to know who they're riding with. They like to know who's going to be showing up, who's going to be providing that service. And they like education. They like to be educated on the different services that are out there to be able to figure out which service is going to be best suited for their needs. So, while we all want to provide the best transportation that we can for our clients, each of us are individually unique. And again, the person-centered approach about meeting the client, where they're at, allows us to help clients to feel safe, to feel like they're being heard and that we're meeting their needs at the time. And I just think that, it's one of those things that the more that we can do for our clients to help them, the better. Meaning that if our system is full, like Mike talked about, if somebody calls and our schedule is full, I'm the first one to give out resources. On SoCoA's website, www.socoa.org, I have an alternate transportation guide that's available. And that gives some information for some reputable providers out there in the community, whether that's Central Indiana or the surrounding counties. And I think just giving clients more of a choice is something that they value. They want to be able to have more than one option, and they want to be able to use all of the different resources out there.
Yeah, it's hugely important. People need to be heard. A reminder that we can take any questions or answers. We do have a question here. I'm not exactly sure who I'll throw to, but how has the new door-to-door car program been working with the app? Again, we're talking technology, not always something that everybody's comfortable with. Are seniors sharing issues with the ability to access the app? Are we talking about Indigo app, possibly a door-to-door car program? Can anyone speak to this?
Hi, this is Mike. I'm not sure what program she's referring to or whomever left that note. So if maybe we can get a little bit more clarification, we could probably answer that a little bit better.
Maybe we could speak though generally to the technology and such apps and ways that seniors are or are not accessing that opportunity, because obviously whole generations are using different ways to find transportation these days, but again, seniors might not be quite as savvy.
Absolutely. Karen, did you want to, you're shaking your head, did you want to start off?
Karen or Jen be able to talk about that.
Sure. So yes, I'm shaking my head because I often talk to, consumers and clients who, and people from the community that talk about not being computer savvy and not having the availability to have internet to be able to get onto some of these sites. But then again, you have others that are totally computer savvy and they want to have that additional option to be able to get online and, can they schedule a ride online? Can they get online to find out what resources are available? At SoCOA, we have our Aging and Disability Resource Center, which is a call center that people call into to be able to ask for additional resources. And I think that giving clients additional options and hearing that they would like, to have different options to, look at in transportation is something that they very much are speaking about. But we do often find that people have a hard time using electronic things if it's not something that they're used to.
Yeah, we do have another question as well, a very good question in my opinion. How can we support ethically diverse older adults with transportation needs, considering language barrier? Obviously, it can be a problem in this population. Has anyone worked, on this issue particularly? Because that I can imagine could be tough.
We often get phone calls at SoCOA, and we use a Luna language line that allows interpreters to help us meet those clients where they're at, and they can help interpret and help us to, help answer their questions, maybe help them get them, scheduled for transportation services or one of the many other services that SoCOA as a nonprofit provides. So, we do have something in place to meet those people's needs and to be able to, help answer their questions in a timely manner.
Jen, maybe I could get you to sort of chime in on, what do you think policymakers should be focused on when we're, considering the ability of lawmakers to touch on these issues? Where should groups really be working towards?
I mean, there's a lot of angles, and unfortunately, you just have to figure out what are the biggest priorities. So there's obviously care, as Karen's been talking about, for the older adults who do need special attention. Funding is always dry for those sorts of services, whether it's Indigo Paratransit or any of the many providers that we have in Marion County and in the suburban counties trying to help those older adults. But as I said, there's also just making sure the conversations are happening about new development patterns and making sure that we're putting in those walkable options, making sure there's conversations about and maybe it's not policy as much as maybe it's internal policy as opposed to like policymakers. But anytime I saw something in the news the other day about a new independent living facility that was going in, and I immediately pulled it up on a map because I wanted to see how disconnected it was going to be from anything that those people could possibly walk to. And there was going to be, I think announced in parallel was a grocery store that was going to be next door. And I looked, and it's on a major highway, but it looked like they would be able to get to that grocery store without going onto the major highway. But there is some things across the highway, which means that the engineers need to think about the time it takes for maybe an older adult to cross the highway, making sure that any sort of pedestrian signals are fully put in place to make it easy for them to actually be able to access things in an area that's maybe not quite as safe as it could be for any human being, but also human beings who may have a little less mobility than some of the younger ones. So just trying to look at all of these different things. There's roadway design, community design, making sure the sidewalks are there, making sure there's ADA accessible ramps, making sure there's lighting so that if it gets a little dark, it's easier to actually see where you're going. So there's a lot of things that factor into it. And I think a lot of times developers just kind of are looking for maybe cheap land and not really thinking about the user of the development that they're putting in and how that user experience is going to play out in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, a lot needs to go into making this, a more perfect system. And like you said, I mean, wow, we'll really be able to wrap your head around all that takes and how many people really need to be cooperating and collaborating in that way. I mean, it's a lot, and we have a lot of work to do. Lakeisha, again, the people in your community, where do you think these people are most wanting to go on public transit? Is it to the health visit? Is it to church? You know, I think about how I would use and have used in other cities in the past public transit, and I want to be able to just hop on and do what I want. Like, what do people want on the Far East Side?
So that's a great question. You asked me what they want versus where they're currently going, but where they do want to go, they want to go shopping. And I would say also to the casinos probably. And I would say worship service and to visit their friends, or maybe in the top 3 from the surveys I heard. Social activities, shopping, and entertainment, if you would say. So if that's bingo, casino, whatever that is, would say. Now, if you ask me what they're using it currently for, it'd be a different top 3, but those would be what I would say.
What are they using it for?
For seniors right now, it is for medical.
Yeah.
And for medical right now, it could be anything from dentist to therapy to, we have people who had hip replacements, to their regular doctor's appointments or follow-up appointments. So anything in the medical field, and to food access, grocery store. So they take their regular grocery store trips. Those are the top ones right now. And some go to the food pantries, but a lot of them do go to the grocery store. So those are the top ones right now.
I mean, yeah, you just have to have it set up for people to be able to access those things. And grocery stores, I mean, you see it is difficult sometimes for someone who might be up in age, you know, getting on and off the bus with bags of groceries. I mean, that's probably where the on-demand comes in. But
Yeah,
you know,
we do a monthly report to Indigo, since we're a paratransit partner, and it breaks down. It can break down who the person is, the demographics and everything, where they're going, their request ride, all that information. So.
I mean, the demand-based transit versus the you know, the fixed transit route can really influence what somebody in the senior population, you know, is able to do and what they want to do. You know, if you just can't run out to the grocery store, Jen, like you'd mentioned, and get, you know, some milk, then you might be, you know, waiting 3 days for milk if that's not in your transportation plans. And the answers just, you know, simply aren't there for people sometimes if it's something that simple. You know, where do we go?
I had an analogy that I had sort of put together where,
you know, really poignant.
Yeah, obviously all older adults are not mobily impaired. There are plenty of people who still are able to drive cars into their 80s. Like, I think what we're concentrating on in this discussion are the older adults who do need some help and who are having sort of changing abilities in their life, and you know, they need some other options. So I had sort of mentioned that, you know, there's some different classifications of trips as well. There's maybe, you know, the church Bible study on Wednesday night. That's the kind of trip where you there are other people going to that same place at that same time and leaving at the same time. And so maybe that's an option where you can just get a ride from somebody else in the Bible study. So that's like a way that an older adult who doesn't drive anymore can still be mobile. And then, you know, there's the option where you have a medical appointment. It's planned in advance, you know that it's coming up. It's really easy to make a paratransit appointment or use the micro transit to put that on the schedule, because you know it's coming and you know what time it's going to be, and it's really easy to schedule, and that's really easy to use that service for that kind of a trip. But then I had mentioned that, like, maybe you scheduled a trip to go to a grocery store because you primarily use the paratransit to get around, or the door-to-door transit to get around, and you had to schedule that trip a week in advance. And then you realize on Monday that you ran out of milk, but the trip doesn't happen until Thursday, and you don't really have an option to get there sooner unless you can find someone else to take you. And so it's kind of like for those daily needs trips, those like access to food when you need to get food, and access to maybe urgent care when you just need to like be able to get yourself somewhere because, you know, you jammed your finger and, you know, it's not life threatening. You don't need an ambulance, but you need to get to an urgent care facility, hopefully the same day, so they can check you out and make sure you've got options. So it's a whole network of needs that we need to figure out, like, how to accommodate all those needs, and they don't all need the same solution.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was really poignant. sort of point that you were making, because it does take all types, and it is really needs to be comprehensive, and we've got a lot of work to do. Michael, when we were listening to or reading about the sort of anecdotal stories of people who may or may not experience transportation in Marion County, it can take a long time. I think, what was it, Stacy? She would have had to, 3.5 hours, to navigate. First, you got to figure out how to navigate it, and then, to actually make the trip. Are we making any headway there, along the routes for seniors that would have to carve 6 hours of the day out to make it to an appointment?
Yeah, that slide was very eye-opening and kind of shocking to me that it took, it would take in that scenario 3.5 hours to get where Stacy was trying to get to. My recommendation is that individuals call our care center and they can help with trip planning. So what we're not seeing in that slide was basically if they went through the process to find out what the shortest route or the shortest time or the best route to take in that scenario. So the customer care center is able to address all calls with fixed route questions and planning, along with Indigo access questions and or scheduling paratransit routes. Some of our routes have more frequency than others. By more frequency is they travel more on that specific route, which is all based on the demand of the route. Higher density, like the Route 8 that runs Washington Street, that is a very busy route. So that has a little bit more frequency than maybe one of the outer lying routes. So again, it's just looking at the network plan. We're continuing to work through and with IMPO on the network system, and hopes in the future that more funding becomes available so that more routes could be introduced. But the reality is that when using the fixed route system, even though it does provide more frequency in some places, it doesn't provide it in all. So it's just an ongoing, it's an on our ongoing list to keep working through. But funding too, it's a reality. All of us as providers, SOAR, funding is huge.
And and people as well, I would imagine. I know Indigo's had some issues with bus driver shortages. We need people to make all these things happen. Is this something that you're experiencing?
So we're experiencing the short staffing not only on the fixed route side, but on the Indigo paratransit side. We've looked at doing wage analysis, increasing wages, which Indigo has done. It's still not giving us the draw or it's not providing us the impact we hoped. So, we're going to have to go back and become more creative, whether that's different benefits, whatever kind of different perks we can get to get people to come in the door. But really, since COVID, transportation companies across the country have really suffered because we are just not able to get employees.
Well, yes, that's continuing problem for so many. So the previous question that we were asking from someone on today was from Pam. Actually, is a community health worker at SOAR, and she was specifically asking about the Indigo Connect program, using that app. Sure. And any response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Pam, first of all, for clarifying that. The Indigo Connect program is another similar microtransit program. It's currently operated by a company named VIA. And the app that they use is, it's really dynamic and it's great. It works well. It's easy to use. Anyone can go onto the App Store, whether you have Apple phone, or if you have an Android, pull up Indigo Connect. It'll let you download the software and on the app onto your phone. Again, very user-friendly, very easy to use, and it's working very well. We have not heard really any negative comments about the app. So if we don't hear it, we have to assume that it's going well, right? Now, if someone is experiencing issues with it, of course, we want to hear it so that we can provide that feedback back to VIA. But the app is working well. Again, it really was designed to be as user-friendly as possible. You know, it will tell you if you're in the zone, or it will tell you if you're out of the zone. But it also provides you fixed route options in case you're out of the zone of the Indigo Connect. So we have it set up where it's going to provide different options, transportation options for individuals to use.
So if you are out of the zone, Jen, you know, one of the anecdotal stories again was, you know, this couple, Gerald, I think, or couldn't even get to where they needed to go, simply couldn't do it. I mean, you know, what are the options for someone that may be in one of the donut counties that does not have a way to do what they want to do?
I mean, that's really going to be a very hard personal decision for them. If you are, I kind of think about aging in place. It's a thing that we've been talking about everywhere for decades. How it's a wonderful thing if you can kind of stay where you are and build your community and really have your life. But I think there might be some phases to aging in place. You know, everybody's life changes. At some point, your kids grow up. They may or may not even live close to you anymore. You know, you may or may not have friends still around. Just life changes, things change. And so I think one of the drawbacks could be somebody who's aging in place, but finds themselves maybe in a house or a place that's disconnected from transportation options other than being able to drive a car. If you can no longer drive a car, then, you know, do you have someone who can come and get you and take a trip? Are you willing to wait a week for a paratransit service? Are you willing to sacrifice, you know, evening engagements because you can no longer get to them? Maybe it is something like I mentioned, a Bible study where maybe somebody can come get you because they're also going to the same Bible study. So there are a lot of different, you know, things that you have to consider when you get to that stage of life. And I think the important thing to keep in mind is, you know, aging in place and being in the same place, it's great. But if your quality of life starts to go down and you start to feel isolated and you just can't get the same need, you know, you can't fulfill the same needs that you could before when you had more mobility options, it might be time to start thinking about locating in a place, whether that's with a family member or in a place that has transit access where you have more flexibility. So these are questions that I can't answer. It's going to be a different answer for every individual human being. You know, they have to make their own choices, but our intention is to make sure there are options. If you don't have an option, your choices are very limited. So being able to have options for people to keep as much quality of life as they possibly can, I think that's our intention, the intention of all of us here.
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously every case is going to be different. That's why this is such a difficult topic to tackle and find true answers. Lakeisha, maybe back to you again. You know, some answers are coming to the Far East Side, transportation answers for your population there. Do you see a willingness for people in your community to maybe move around a little bit, maybe not stay in the home that's on the far side of Council 14, but maybe move closer to something along the new developing transit options? Do you see a willingness to do that?
I think that just depends on the population and the demographics you're talking about. For my
For the older generation, I mean, you know, and it's harder, you know, to uproot, you know, where you've always been in your neighborhood and your community, and then, you know, move to somewhere that might be more convenient, but maybe that's what it takes.
But Jill, look where we are right now. You try to go look at housing,
Yeah,
whether it's an apartment,
yeah,
or whether it's actual a home that they own. Prices are ridiculous right now.
yeah.
So if there's somewhere that they can be put, they have to balance between, do I stay where I'm at currently where I can afford, or do I try to move in to get closer to transportation? So right now, that's a question. So for those who are independent and they are comfortable and it's a lifestyle choice for them, or they're independent and they can be okay where they are now. It just depends on the population you're talking about. So you're talking about uprooting a senior, uprooting to move closer to transportation. That can be very difficult, especially in the status we're in now. We're still in COVID, and we're in a time where inflation affects everything that's going on. I have people that their wait list for affordable housing, if you're talking about the underserved population, you're talking about a year to 2 year plus waiting list to get affordable housing right now. And if you're talking about not affordable housing or workforce housing, you're talking about you're talking about 12, 14, 15, $1,600. I just had a lady that emailed me last night. She's paying $1,400 in rent. So that's a tough question.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the way of the world right now does not make it so easy for someone to uproot and just move on down the street to somewhere that might be closer to transportation. A lot of factors involved in where people are and how they're moving about right now. I would invite anyone that has any final questions to go ahead and place it in the Q&A, and we can ask our panelists. But maybe one last question over to you, Karen. You know, when we're looking at this population and we're trying to provide the best services for people in Marion County when it comes to transportation, what some advice do you have for someone that's just starting out, you know, that's really that hasn't had to rely on public transportation in the past, but does now?
I think reaching out and gaining education to see what all services are available to meet their needs is something that should be number one. And I think that you know, the more that we can educate them and allow them to know what their options are, allows them the opportunity to be able to make a choice, to make their own decisions, instead of somebody saying, this is the only thing that you have to use this or you can't travel. And again, that's something that we have overheard many times from our consumers and from the public, is the fact that they want options. They want to be able to, you know, maybe utilize Way2Go transportation to get to the grocery store, but maybe they want to utilize Indigo Access to get back and forth to work. They need to figure out, you know, what all resources are available out there. And I think that's where education comes into it. At SoAR, that's one of the things that we take great value in, is being able to provide resources and education to people to give them options, because again, that's what they're asking for. Hey, give me some options. Let me make a choice. Let me make a decision. Let me live independently, but let me figure out what is best suited for me again. So that's, you know, that's my answer to that one.
And we did have one final question pop up for SoAR as well, from Amanda, who asks, is the transportation options income-based?
Currently, it is not. Currently, we provide a very discounted rate for transportation. As of today, if somebody was to call, we provide a round trip for $5. We ask for a donation of $5 that goes directly back into the program. As we've talked about previously, you know, in the economy right now, everything is increasing. Fleet fuel is increasing. When we look at the price of insurance is increasing to be able to be a provider, which sometimes has been a hindrance for some of the smaller local, what we call mom and pop, you know, shops that are able to only run, you know, a couple of vehicles and they don't have a fleet. I think another thing that we have seen is that we are not getting new vehicles right now. New vehicles are on hold and we won't be getting them for a couple of years. So we're experiencing increased cost in maintenance, increased cost in like fleet fuel, like Mike talked about. We are experiencing some difficulties with a little bit of a driver shortage as well. We went through and did an increase to wages, hoping that that would be beneficial. But it still is not enough to be able to get us the amount of drivers that we are needing. So I hope that in 2023 that we can, you know, figure out what it is that's needed to get these valuable personnel back out there on the streets to help our clients. But I think that we've got some challenges that we have to face, and it's been mentioned here many times, more funding. And I think that my colleagues on here can all agree that would be a helpful, solution to maybe put some of these other things into fruition.
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do. More funding, more people, more answers, more solutions. I think that's gonna have to wrap our panel up today. Again, thank you to Michael Roth with Indigo, Lakeisha Jackson, City County Councilor, District 14, Jen Higginbotham with IMPO, and Karen Brooks there from SoCOA. A lot of good discussion on a very important topic. And I thank you all for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you. Thanks, Jill, for having us.
And we'll be turning it back now to my colleague, Gail, with WFYI to finish up today's event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We want to appreciate that you spent your time with us today. We also want to appreciate that you have the opportunity to weigh in on future state of aging reports here in Central Indiana. We will be posting this along with questions and answers as we go forward. Please continue to send those questions, and please do continue to wonder about this opportunity. Thanks so much for being here. Bye.